Hello from Brighton on the south coast of the UK. I'm Seb Long, Managing Director here at Player Research. We're an established agency that runs game-focused research of many kinds, working with a huge variety of game studios globally. This talk is all about advice for freelance researchers. As a bit of background, I've worked as a freelance researcher, albeit briefly before joining Player Research more than 15 years ago. And whilst we're now a team of around 30 people, almost all of the work we do here is short-term and ad hoc in the same way that a freelancer might find themselves working as a team of one. Play Research also occasionally works with freelancers who join our team as contingent workers, supporting both our research projects, large and small. Let's start with a disclaimer that this isn't legal or financial advice, but I'll briefly talk about contracts, tax and laws. You should always seek advice relevant to your local jurisdiction. Here's what I'd like to cover. What is freelancing? Who freelances? What could you do as freelance work? What might prospective employers want of you? Things you can do to ready yourself for a freelance gig, and the hustle. I'll also start by giving thanks to these additional contributors to this talk's content. Thank you very much. Let's begin with the groundwork. What is freelancing and who does it? Freelancing is paid, short or fixed-term work for another company. You might be employed via your own company, like an LLC or an LTD or similar. Employment would be organised around a contract with a fixed start and end date. Perhaps rather than an annualised salary, these roles would have payment per hour, per day, or per engagement, with specific and unconditional outcomes expected where your job isn't done until those outcomes are achieved. About 1% of games user researchers in the 2024 salary survey described themselves as freelancers. That compares to about 8% that worked in similarly structured ad hoc projects at an agency like ours rather than freelance. However, the present global downturn in the games industry has naturally pushed many folks to consider if freelance work is an option for them. And personally, I'd expect to see this number increase somewhat in future salary survey data. As a side note, if you'd like to see that salary survey data, please share and contribute at gamesursurvey.com. In 2025, the co-runners of the salary survey and I did not have enough respondents to generate the global graph, as for the first time in 10 years of running the survey, we're not able to produce those findings, which are usually due out around this time every year. If you're as disappointed in this as I am, please spread the word about the salary survey for this year. It's viewable now at the official website, gamesursurvey.com. Okay, moving on. Who freelances? Generally speaking, there are groups of responsibilities that a freelancer might take on. The first of those is research assistants, who provide execution support, often on-site at studios. Running in-person sessions is logistically demanding, and having research assistants support those playtests, well, it helps keep things running smoothly. Jumping up to when you're able to contribute to analysis, but dropping in as a skilled researcher to support the execution of playtesting in part or whole, helping with the data analysis and perhaps findings and deliverable compilation. Stepping up again, leads. They own research design and execution. They're project managers who can take on complex problems, design research to fit, execute and deliver a whole project, including managing seconds, those research assistants, internal and external support teams, and work directly with the diverse development teams producing the game. Stepping up again, let's talk about trainers. These folks would undertake formal teaching through classes, workshops, guest lectures, or executive training, or similar. And lastly, at the top of my ladder here, strategists. They're highly skilled, engaged specifically to build a plan, which typically includes some form of workshop, but also could be coaching, formal mentorship, or similar kind of service. You can see an increasing level of responsibility as we move through these roles. Each of those is necessarily backed up with both experience in research and an increased preparedness, right? Readiness to provide these services. I hope it's already clear to you where you would fit on this ladder and how the next level up from you is a stretch of the skills you've built elsewhere. I hope you can also imagine ways to prepare for each of these types of engagement if they were asked of you. Some freelance roles might combine multiple of these skills. For example, by building buy-in with a new team through some formal training before launching into a short campaign of research that you might design and execute in partnership with research assistants. You can also imagine that the partners you have on the team, the person commissioning the work from you, will be different in each of these cases. Some of these roles presuppose that someone on the client team is experienced with research. They'll be leading the project, bringing you in only for support. Your point of contact in that case might be the researcher. In other cases, you might be the only researcher on the team. Their eyes would turn to you for that ownership to steer the ship, to steer their project. You are deciding the plan and responsible for executing it. Your point of contact would be a leader from that team, from a discipline probably other than research. I hope I'm painting a picture of how your contributions and your stakeholder expectations will combine and offer a wide spectrum of different scenarios, but you can nonetheless personally prepare for or potentially even target in your search for freelance work. Much of the thinking here boils down to one single question. What can you do to a professional standard? If you have battle-tested knowledge, processes, and management skills, you're going to be able to land higher on this list and likely be paid more for the greater impact that you are facilitating. It's a lot easier to work with freelancers that clearly know what complete responsibilities they can own. There's no need for the employer side to decode or intuit how the freelancer might react to the norms of research they have, or the specificities of the short-term work that might be available. Ideally, you'd be able to close the gap completely between your stated skills and the activities that the employer is seeking to complete. I'd advise you to build a list and publicize a list of things you're able to demonstrably do, covering both the activity as you see it, a playtest, an expert analysis, and so on, and your evidence, probably coming in the form of testimonials or example deliverables. I want to frame this whole section in terms of being able to make promises. I want you to be able to say, I promise that if you put me in a boardroom, I can teach and convince stakeholders on a research strategy. Or I promise that if you hand me some research questions, I can turn them into a high quality survey in a few hours. Making promises like this relies on you deeply knowing your own strengths and weaknesses, to be able to make accurate predictions of your ability to not only deliver on these promises, but also the time it might take you to do so. Perhaps the biggest and most high-intensity promise being what's called turnkey research, doing absolutely everything needed on a playtest project so your employer might not have to lift so much more than a finger. This mindful process of promise making takes your skills and turns them into services that a prospective employer can purchase from you. I've described your strengths and services as being battle-tested and prepared by you, like predetermined, pre-formulated. But I want to mention the sort of counterbalance to that pre-formulation. In whatever role you're taking on, from a research assistant to a strategist, you will be playing by someone else's rulebook. You are expected as a freelancer to be extremely flexible, balancing doing things your way and doing things their way. This pertains to research, obviously, but also to the tools, to the working practice, to the contracts, to the billing, and so on. Flexibility in your research approach and deliverables will be needed for studios both with and without research norms internally. For example, adopting to a norm of unmoderated testing, even if you usually rely on Think Aloud. Or agreeing to run discussion groups, even if the approach might not yield value, in your opinion. Or acknowledging that some teams simply institutionally reject design suggestions, even if that's perfectly normal for you. Flexibility means checking your ego at the door and being excited to try things done differently. I could summarize this by sort of saying, don't say yes to everything and don't say no to everything. Your employers in previous experience or your university teachers have taught you very well, but take it from me, there are massive variations in the way that player research is performed industry-wide, and your normal will not be the normal. That difference in some contexts might mean you ought to walk away from short-term gigs if they're a bad fit for you. Let's quickly run through some of the homework you can do to prepare yourself for a freelance role. I've mentioned already the value of your services, right? The services and activities you are promising to own, aligned roughly with that ladder of increasing responsibilities I showed earlier. Getting that communication into a website or a portfolio or a similar way of communicating that, now that's fairly normal in this space and you should expect to do that. If you're working from home in some form, you can expect to have some security requests made of you. But you can start now by getting the absolute basics done. That can include ensuring you have a lockable room to work in, especially if you don't live alone. You can also encrypt your main devices with BitLocker or similar encryption. You can make sure that the password on your home Wi-Fi has been changed if you're still using the default one, especially, and updating the firmware on all those devices. And you should be using a genuine and updated version of Windows and a modern antivirus. Being local to your prospective employer is helpful, firstly because you're not accruing travel costs, and secondly because you're highly likely to have an existing right to work where you're living. You should be ready to prove that right with relevant documentation. Noting it's also possible you might need a criminal records check if you're working with children. That might be something you can also prepare. One of the things that all freelance work has in common is contract law, and you'll need some support to parse the complex legalese. It's worth preparing now by finding a contract-savvy person to help you unpick what you're being asked to sign, with obvious also implications on the tax and associated with your freelancer status, healthcare and so on, for which I don't provide direct advice in this talk for obvious reasons. There are also some big ticket items that you might be expected to have already as part of a freelance engagement. Depending on the nature of your contract and any activities you're undertaking, you might, for example, require proof of liability insurance, which can be expensive. It might be expected for you to already have the devices required to run the game. And again, the gaming PCs needed to run games whilst they're in development sits easily in the top 5% of consumer devices. Access to testing hardware for consoles requires a great deal of preparation work and cost, so make sure you're accounting for these and asking if they are required of you. This gets us neatly, of course, to rates, what you're asking to charge. Your rates are your responsibility, and having at least some sense of your comfort zone for hourly or daily rates, as well as any minimums or other stipulations, that should be expected and you can prepare for that. Your prospective clients will have a budget, and it will probably be below what you want to charge. But it's your responsibility to know if there's an agreeable medium figure and negotiate if not. Let's finish up by talking a bit about the hustle. That's the work that gets the work. Putting yourself out there and securing freelance work that pays your bills through networking and connecting with studios locally and globally. There is a reason that only 1% of games user researchers consider themselves freelancers. There's not presently, I don't think, a huge untapped seam of paid work out there that's suitable for individuals. But it is my sense that the games industry is heading through a period where fixed-term and flexible staffing is higher in demand, and driven, of course, by warranted fear about commitments to permanent headcount. Industry changes notwithstanding, you have to get out there and secure work for yourself. Your easiest selling point is being local, as I've mentioned, supporting on-site work, ideally with the advantages of having no travel costs and so on. I note that even if work comes to you, you have the chance to pitch for being engaged in some projects, you might realistically only expect to win maybe 1 in 5 of those projects that you see. That means you might need to be pitching for 1 month of work for every week of work you'll actually get paid for. For some, this is incredibly exciting and rewarding, and for others, this is understandably too intense. Putting yourself out there is much easier with a menu of things you can do and you have done for others, but it is absolutely not easy. I really hope this advice can help. Thanks for coming to the talk. You can join the Discord at gamesur.com to talk with other researchers, freelance and otherwise, to share advice and your successes, and I'll see you there. Thanks.